About 2 years ago, here and there. My mentor,
Now to London for live coverage of Prime Minister's Question Time. Every Wednesday while Parliament is in session, British Prime Minister Tony Blair takes questions from members of the House of Commons. Prior to Question Time, the House of Commons is wrapping up previous business. This is live coverage on C-SPAN 2.
So when we're the EU presidency, but the truth is there are 25 EU member states and they have different views. And the presidency, however hard it pushes, if people do have those different views, cannot take the decision on behalf of all of the 25 member states. What is the lesson that we must learn? What is the conclusion we must draw? That we have to work even harder now, all of us, to ensure that the blockage to these negotiations is removed in the short amount of time we have in the first part of this year, so that we can actually see progress on the things that are really going to make a difference to developing countries.
Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Anne Moffat.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, sir, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in the House, I will have further such meetings later today.
Anne Moffat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure you'll be aware, as the whole House will, that today is Burns Day and we're celebrating Robert Burns Day. My right honourable friend, I wonder has he had a chance to read a speech given last week describing Scotland as Third Scotland and likened us to Bosnia, Iran, North Korea and the Gaza Strip. Does my right honourable friend know which? Wee Sleekit, Cowran, Timorous Beastie made that speech?
I do, actually. First of all, can I say to my honourable friend and to all Scots today, wish them well for Burns Day and Burns Night. And secondly, can I just point out that since this government came to power, there are around about 200,000 more people in work in Scotland. Unemployment is down by a third. Employment is at its highest level since records began. And over 500,000 people have been lifted from absolute poverty in Scotland. The Scottish economy is thriving, there is investment in the public services, and poverty is getting better, not worse.
David Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad the Prime Minister is reading my speeches. That's very welcome. I want to know if he's reading the Deputy Prime Minister's speeches. Now, the Deputy Prime Minister said, and I quote, "If you set up a school and it becomes a good school, the great danger is that everyone wants to go there." Now, does the Prime Minister agree with me that you should not compromise with people who think that creating good schools is a bad idea?
I, of course, want to see more good schools, which is why I'm delighted to say that since this government came to power, the numbers of schools where the school gets over 70% of the pupils getting 5 good GCSEs is up from just over 80 in 1997 to over 500 today. So thanks to the investment and reform introduced by this government, there are more good schools and more pupils going to them.
Mr. knows that there are still 1 million children in failing schools, so the need for reform is vital. Now, on Monday, the Prime Minister rightly ruled out inserting the 76-page admissions code into his education bill. On trust schools, will he confirm what he said to me in our very first exchange in this House? Will he state categorically that the freedoms in the White Paper, schools owning their own buildings, employing their own staff, developing their own culture, will he confirm that all of those freedoms will not be watered down and will arrive in the education bill?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I will confirm that. And what is more, let me tell him why it is important. Well, and actually, he's absolutely right. I have been reading his speeches recently. I've read some on education as well. And I'm delighted to note that he now agrees with us that there should be no return to academic selection. So we are in favour of greater freedom for schools, no return to academic selection, and therefore I look forward to his support.
He'll have our support, but I have to say I love these lectures on consistency from the Prime Minister. His first act as Prime Minister was to abolish grant-maintained schools, and his last act as Prime Minister is to bring them back again. This is someone who came into politics to soak the rich and ban the bomb, and ever since he's been sucking up to the rich and dropping bombs. But that's enough. That's enough of that. Back to education. Back to education. The Prime Minister told us every time he's introduced a reform, he wished he'd gone further. So will he accept our offer of support in the division lobbies so that he can put the whole of his white paper into the bill? And will he put the bill to the House without delay? Time is running out for the Prime Minister, so will he get on with it?
First of all, of course we will be publishing the bill shortly and putting it to the House, and I look forward to his support on it. But when he talks about consistency in politics, I think he should be a little wary of talking about consistency in politics. He may have a point about the Labour manifesto election in 1983 and what we have done subsequently, but let me point out to him some of the things he has been changing his mind on within the last few weeks, not the last few months. The patient's passport. We will say to people languishing on waiting lists that if they go private, they can take with them 1/2 of what the operation would have cost on the NHS. David Cameron, June 2004. David Cameron, June 2005. I think we were wrong to have a patient's passport that took people. Foundation hospitals. May 2003. This week, the Labour government brought forward their plans for foundation hospitals. The Conservative Party voted against them, a decision I wholeheartedly supported. David Cameron, November 2005. It was a mistake, frankly, to oppose foundation hospitals. Shall I go
on? Order. I think the Prime Minister's made the point. Andrew McKinley.
This House has comity with government and is not subordinate to government. Therefore, instead of abrogating the Wilson Doctrine, will the Prime Minister beef it up to take account of modern forms of communication? Failure to do so will send all the wrong signals to Lukashenko, Mugabes around the world that somehow it'd be all right to go down that slippery slope of abuse, bearing in mind backbenchers. Their stock in trade is dealing with whistleblowers and other people who irritate the government of the day. I'll do a deal with John Scarlett and Manning and Buller. They can listen to my telephone conversations if I can listen to theirs.
I mean, obviously that is that's an immensely tempting offer, but. And personally, I have never found my honourable friend irritating in any shape or form at all. But I've always welcomed him as an independent thinker. But on the Wilson Doctrine, I'm afraid he'll have to wait until we make our announcement on that. But let me just say one thing again, which I said to the House before, I think, last week, but let me repeat. The reason this arises is because of recommendations put to us by the Intercepts Commissioner. It arises for no other reason whatever. We are considering it carefully, and once we have come to a decision, we will, of course, announce it to the House.
Sir Mingus Campbell.
The Prime Minister rightly said that Africa is a scar on the conscience of the world, and he made Africa the focus of the British presidency of the G8. With hundreds of thousands of people dead and 2 million displaced, haven't we failed the people of Darfur?
I think the international community is failing people in Darfur, which is why it is so important we take the measures that the Development Secretary, indeed the government, have been pressing for. And those measures have got to include not just the immediate humanitarian help, but also to make sure that the Africa Union peacekeeping force comes up to its full strength. The only way that the situation in Darfur is going to improve is when there are sufficient numbers of peacekeeping forces on the ground to keep the combatants apart, when the process of dialogue and peace takes place, which we have been calling for, and obviously where the measures are in place to improve humanitarian help. So we have to do more, but we are doing more, and I would just point out to the Right Honourable Gentleman, we as the British government have been leading the efforts in this area and will continue to do so.
Sir Mingus Campbell.
But as we talk about these matters, the killing and the violence and the rape continues. Will the Prime Minister now confirm to the House that the United Kingdom and the Security Council will press for an increase in the size of the African Union force, will ensure that it has a strengthened mandate and also a commitment that it is fully funded, equipped and supported?
We are doing precisely that. I mean, that is the reason why we have pressed for the Africa Union peacekeeping force to be increased. We fully support the proper funding of that. I would, however, say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, I'm sure he would want to be fair on this, I think this country can be very proud of what it's done in respect of Africa over the past few years. We've now trebled our aid to Africa. We've played a major part, obviously, in getting aid obligations increased right round the world. We've played a major part as well in respect of debt relief. There is much else to be done in respect of Africa, not least the killer diseases, HIV, AIDS, and TB and malaria and so forth. But this country, over these past few years, and in particular through the Department of International Development, has been leading the way in respect of Africa and the changes that are needed there. So we will continue to do our best in respect of Sudan. I agree it's a very serious situation, but I think this country should be proud of what it has done.
Helen Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Prime Minister aware that for every acre of children's playgrounds in this country, there are 80 acres of golf courses? Will he therefore join me in congratulating Councillor Lucy Hovels, the Deputy Mayor of Sedgefield Borough, who has secured funds for playgrounds across the borough? And will he also agree with the all-party parliamentary group on play that adequate space for housing should be made in all new housing developments?
First of all, I'm delighted to add my congratulations to Councillor Lucy Hovels, who, as my honourable friend will know, is well known to me too, and has done an immense amount of work for young people in our communities. And it's worth just emphasising that, of course, part of the Respect Action Plan is not just the tougher powers and the extra community support officers, but it's also specifically the help that will be available for young people and to increase youth services. That's an important part of making sure that we tackle antisocial behaviour and give our young people the opportunities they need.
Pure Swinson.
In light of British Crime Survey figures that show that almost half of women in the UK experience domestic violence, sexual assault or stalking, and the End Violence Against Women report presented to him last November by victims of violence, giving his government 1 out of 10 on this issue, will the Prime Minister commit to developing an integrated strategy to ensure he does not come bottom of the class this year?
I think, in fairness, it should be said that over the past few years in respect of domestic violence, there has been a great deal of work done, not just by the government, by the police, to make sure that victims of domestic violence report the offences that are committed against them. And I would say to the Honourable Lady that if she looks at the programmes the government has introduced on domestic violence, we have a strategy in place for the first time. Now, of course, it's got to be implemented and driven through across the country, but I think it would be wrong to suggest no progress had been made.
Dan Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Hull, more than 300 young people have volunteered as junior community wardens, working alongside the extra Bobbies on the Beat and the police community support officers in Hull. Will my right honourable friend maintain his focus on the respect agenda and not, as the party opposite do, come up with new gimmicks every day of the week which don't work?
I think it is important to recognise, as my honourable friend does, that of course the action plan on respect includes the strong new powers that are necessary for local communities, but she's right as well. The community support officers and of course the volunteering activities of people in their local communities play a very, very important part. And of course, in respect of youth volunteering, the proposals of the Russell Commission will make a great deal of difference, backed by government funding as they are. But she is right to say it's in the end when local communities get the power in their own hands that a real difference can be made.
David Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On police force amalgamation, last week, this is an important issue affecting many communities in the House. The Prime Minister said last week he would listen to local people. He said specifically, many different things could happen, including forces coming together for certain strategic tasks that they're better able to fulfil on a common rather than a singular basis. Can the Prime Minister tell us exactly what he meant? Does this mean that amalgamations don't have to go ahead?
We've got to listen to what people are saying, and there are different views, obviously, about the police reform, and one possibility is that you have strategic coming together on certain issues rather than mergers, but it's got to be looked at, obviously, on a case-by-case basis, and we should listen carefully to what people are saying. But can I just point out that the reason why this comes forward as an issue is the Association of Chief Police Officers said that they believed that the present configuration of forces wasn't satisfactory in fighting crime. We then, as a result of that, commissioned a report from the Inspectorate of Constabulary. That report said very strongly that there needed to be fundamental reform, and that's the reason why these proposals are brought forward. But I agree it's important we listen to people, listen carefully to what people are saying. The trouble is, as ever with these situations, is that not everyone's obviously in agreement as to what is the right way forward. But the aim should be, the objective, what is the most effective way of policing local communities with the greatest amount of accountability and the greatest amount of effectiveness. Now, obviously, we'll listen very carefully to what people say.
No one denies the need for reform, but I think the Prime Minister will accept. The Prime Minister should accept that he is striking a very different tone to the Home Secretary. The Home Secretary said that smaller forces must be abolished and larger ones must be created. The Prime Minister is saying that they could survive if they share certain tasks strategically. Now, will he make sure that the Home Secretary thinks again and doesn't force through amalgamations?
It's not a question of forcing it through. It's a question... No, it's not. It's a question of answering the point made by the Inspector of Constabulary, and perhaps I could just read it out to the Right Honourable Gentleman, since you will see why it is we embarked on this process. The Constabulary report said this: the 43 force structure is no longer fit for purpose. In the interests of efficiency and effectiveness of policing, it should change. We now firmly believe that some reorganisation of forces and reconfiguration of protective services is inescapable. So it's fairly obvious from that they're not merely saying this is accidental or incidental to better policing. They're saying it's fundamental to it. Now, as I say, we will listen carefully. There are a number of different directions that this could take, and it could be different in different parts of the country. But I hope that he would understand that it's no use being in favour of police reform in general if he simply opposes it all in particular.
But actually, isn't there a much more important reform agenda which will address the fact that 1 in 4 crimes now is only being detected, police officers spend less than a fifth of their time on the streets, and it takes 3.5 hours for every arrest to be processed? Isn't the real police reform agenda about changing working practices, cutting paperwork, and making them properly accountable to local people?
It's precisely what we're doing, for example, with the summary powers. Yes, it is. With the summary powers that are being introduced, fixed penalty notices, for example, are a massive saving on bureaucracy, as chiefs of police often point out. And when he talks, of course, about police reform, I think the most important thing is that the police get the right visible uniform presence out on the street, and that's why it's important, not merely that we have record numbers of police officers, but that we supplant that with community support officers, and all of them given the powers they need in local communities. And it's all very well to talk, as he does, about incompetent or lazy police officers. I don't believe that is the problem with the police. I think the problem is that they need the powers that we have agreed to give them, and I hope you will support us on that, and they also need to be backed up by the right support staff, and that must include community support officers. And I think if he was able to support that agenda, and I hope very much incidentally support the agenda not just on antisocial behaviour but on organised crime that will be coming up soon, if he's prepared to support those things, then I think we've got a far better opportunity to get effective policing in our communities.
Alan Whitehead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What estimate has my right honourable friend made of the carbon emission savings arising from the introduction of the climate change levy? Does he favour the introduction of further fiscal measures to save carbon emissions? And if he does, would he welcome a degree of consensus in their introduction?
I'd welcome a degree of consensus, yes. But unfortunately, I think the party officers made it clear yet again that they're opposed to the climate change levy. I think that is the position of the... No, that was only just a few days ago. I would say it's at least valid for this week. But my honourable friend is absolutely right. Of course, the climate change levy has made a real difference to the reduction of CO2 emissions by several million tonnes, I think it is true to say. And therefore, it is extremely important that we keep it. I'm also very pleased to note that the UK was seen as ranked 5th best in the world on the Independent Environment League table. That is extremely good news, and it shows that this country has been at the forefront of the issue of climate change and will continue to be so.
Alex Salmon, will the Prime Minister accept that there won't be much of a Burns Night celebration for the 720 workers made redundant as a result of the closure of Lexmark in the small community of Rosyth? Is the Prime Minister really unaware that there are 7,000 industrial manufacturing jobs being lost in Fife and 100,000 in Scotland since he took office? And what level of industrial disaster is required to shake this Prime Minister and his Chancellor out of their totally unjustified complacency on the competitive position of manufacturing in Scotland?
Not the slightest bit complacent about it, and of course we deeply sympathise with those people that have recently lost their jobs. But the only way to support those people is to do what we will do, which is to make sure that we give them every help in training and help with other jobs, that we put in the same type of package of assistance that we've done in many situations where jobs have been lost either in the manufacturing or service sector in the whole of the UK in the past few years. And I have to say to the honourable gentleman, it is no use claiming sympathy with those people unless we actually are prepared to act to help them. And by what he is proposing, which is effectively to say he could somehow prevent jobs ever going in manufacturing in Scotland, that is simply a cruel deception of people. It would do them no good whatever to pretend that that is the case, but we will give every single support to those people in the difficult times that they face ahead.
Neil Turner.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is an avid reader of the back pages of the local press, the national press, so he will be aware, as the rest of the world is, that Wigan Athletic humbled the mighty Arsenal on their own mitten last night to reach the Carling Cup final. But Wigan is more than just a football and rugby league premier town. We have other facilities. But if we are going to attract into Wigan a national team to come for the Olympics, then we need more and better facilities. So can I ask if you will have a more than quiet word in the ear of the Culture and Media Sports Secretary through the nations and regions, if we can, group that she is setting up, if we can have an international swimming pool so we can have a legacy there and a ability to train and make sure that we have the athletes who are world champions in the future.
Well, first of all, can I say to my honourable friend at the risk of alienating every Arsenal supporter in the country to congratulate Wigan on their progress. Unfortunately, I had the poor judgment to switch off in the 28th minute of extra time. But if I can say to my honourable friend that my right friend, the Culture Secretary, was nodding throughout his question. I don't know whether she was quite nodding when it got to the swimming pool point. But I'm sure she will listen very carefully to what he has said. And I believe the Olympics has got a tremendous potential for every single region of the country. And he is absolutely right in saying Wigan has come an enormous way in the past few years in every sense in a sporting way. And so I'm sure will benefit enormously from the Olympics, which I believe, as I say, will benefit not just London, but the whole of the country.
James Clarkison.
Whether or not we are to have a Great Britain Day, will the Prime Minister at least do what he can do to help keep the UK theme on early British morning radio so that we can promote a UK theme, especially on Burns Night?
I have to say to the honourable gentleman, I mean, obviously my influence with the BBC is legendary, but I know they will be aware of the very strong feeling that is expressed by him and by many others, I'm sure, in the House and across the country.
Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree that strong intergovernmental relationships within Europe are of great importance to this country, and they are enhanced by strong fraternal relationships between European sister parties?
Well, I believe that the relationships across Europe between the political parties and their different groupings have not just a beneficial impact on the parties themselves, but of course they're very important for the country, because in the European Parliament it's important that the Labour Party is able to work with other Labour parties, the Conservative Party with other Conservative parties. So I look forward to this particular policy being changed as well, and when that happens I will welcome it, of course.
Jenkins.
Can I point out to the Prime Minister that he said we should listen carefully to what people are saying 4 times during his reply about policing to my right honourable friend. Can I point out that these police mergers are exactly the kind of remote regionalism that were rejected by the people of the North East in the referendum a year ago? And isn't it somewhat Orwellian to argue that by abolishing the Essex Chief Constable and transferring his responsibility to some regional superforce, that somehow policing is going to be more local?
Of course, how things are policed in the basic command unit in local communities is also extremely important. But I think it's a somewhat exaggerated point he makes. The reason, as I say, we have brought forward these proposals is because of the Inspectorate of Constabulary report at the prompting of the Association of Chief Police Officers themselves. Now, I entirely accept there are some people in favour of mergers, some people against mergers, some people in between. So we are going to have to take a decision as to what is best for local police forces, but we'll do so, of course, listening to what local people say. But in the end, surely what we both want to see is the most effective form of policing.
Evan Jones.
Mr. Speaker, would my right honourable friend join with me in congratulating Chesley Street in my North Durham constituency, which tomorrow celebrates the fact that it has had Labour representation in this House for over 100 years. Would he agree with me that a fitting tribute to those early Labour pioneers is the national minimum wage, which was a commitment to the 1906 Labour Party? And the fact that this Labour government has introduced it is a tribute to those early pioneers.
First of all, long may Labour representation continue in Chesley Street. And secondly, can I say to my honourable friend, of course he's right about the minimum wage, which is now helping well over 1 million people in this country. It has made a huge difference. Again, I'm pleased to say now everyone accepts that it is right, and along with the support given through the tax credit system to families to be able to work and raise their family properly, it has been one of the things that has helped prove that you can combine economic efficiency and social justice.
Stephen Harmon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier, the Prime Minister spoke about the number of schools where 70% of the pupils achieved 5 A to Cs. Is he aware, in my constituency, that no non-faith state secondary school achieves that? The dead hand of Merton Local Education Authority deprives those pupils of achieving standards similar to surrounding boroughs. Will he assure my constituents that local authorities will be commissioners, not providers of education services? And will he give trust schools necessary autonomy to secure increase in standards?
It will be important that we use the new powers in order to raise standards in his constituency and elsewhere. But I'm sure that he would accept also that one of the benefits of this government is the massive investment that there's been in education. And that has meant, for example, that in an area such as his, the numbers of 11-year-olds passing their exam results has increased dramatically over the past few years. The number of 16-year-olds getting 5 good GCSEs, well, it's true. In Merton and elsewhere, that is exactly what has happened. And that is why the process of investment and reform will continue, but under this government.
The Prime Minister will recall meeting the family of the murdered Leicester teenager Stefan Pekera. They believe that the perpetrator of the savage attack on him was influenced by the video game Manhunt. Is he aware of the new research that has been published by the University of Missouri, which shows that there is a link between violent video games and the greater propensity of people to act with violence? Will he look at this area of policy to see whether there are any further measures that can protect our children? This is not about adult censorship. It is the protection of young children and young people.
Well, my honourable friend is obviously has campaigned on this issue over a long period of time, and I would pay tribute to the work that he has done. And it was partly as a result of the representations he made that we announced last year. We had commissioned our own research to establish whether there was any substance allegations of a link between playing violent computer games and violent behaviour in real life. And the DCMS, I'm told, intends to publish the results of that research shortly. We're also aware of the Missouri-Columbia research as well to the same effect. So we will be looking very carefully, studying the impact of that research, and then we will have a debate, obviously, as to how we take it forward.
Ben Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the Prime Minister please tell the House the difference between a grant-maintained school and one of his new trust schools?
There will be fair funding and fair admissions, and there were neither with grant-maintained schools.
Order. Shan James.
Will he join me in expressing concern about privatised water companies who threaten to cut off the supply to local people? Residents in Sway Road, Morriston, in my constituency, have been threatened with such action because of a fault with the main water supply. Will he ensure that people always have access to running water?
Well, I know there are protocols in respect to which the water companies are supposed to operate. I don't know about the particular instance that my honourable friend raises, but I will look into it and write to her.
Sandra Gidley.
When he reshuffles his cabinet, will he ensure that the Minister for Women receives a salary?
Well, I'm afraid she will have to await the news of the reshuffle along with everyone else.
Mark Lazarovich.
As my right honourable friend will be aware, my private member's bill on climate change receives its committee stage this afternoon. I'm grateful to the support from the government and indeed across this House. Will my right honourable friend look very closely at the possibility of ensuring the bill is able to bring into law an analysis of the way in which we can use economic and fiscal measures to promote the government's policies to tackle climate change?
Well, it is a bill that the government is supporting, so we will obviously look for ways of ensuring that it comes into effect.
Order. Urgent question, Dr. Liam Fox.
From London, you've been watching Prime Minister's Question Time, aired live every Wednesday while Parliament is in session at 7 a.m. Eastern here on C-SPAN 2. You can see it again Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern and Pacific on C-SPAN. For more information, go to cspan.org.